welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. I'm your host, Harold Thornborough. Glad you're joining me today. And today we have a great topic. We're going to talk about planting for fall crops. I'm going to be joined by Mary Smith from Mary's Heirloom Seeds because, well, she's just a wealth of knowledge in this topic. She knows so much about gardens and seeds and planting, and she has some great suggestions for planting for those fall crops, what kinds of crops you should be planting, how to determine what to plant. Just a ton of information in this podcast. So with that, let's just jump into our conversation with Mary. Well, Mary, welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I wanted to reach out to you to have you on for this topic today. We're going to talk about planting for fall crops because I know you know a lot about it. I've followed your writings quite a bit. You get on YouTube every week, I think, and do like a Q&A or just carry on a topic and answer some questions. And you have a lot of knowledge on the subject of seeds and planting and growing crops. So you're one I wanted to reach out to talk about this topic. So I know you'll be a great guest for this.
I love talking about seeds. So I'm always happy to help people. I do go live on YouTube every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central. Usually I have a specific topic, but sometimes I'm just throwing it out there like, hey, ask me your questions, seed specific, garden specific, and sometimes we get off topic, but generally we stick to gardens and seeds.
Well, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do before we get started.
Well, my name is Mary, and I am the owner and operator of Mary's Heirloom Seeds. I started Mary's Heirloom Seeds in 2011 when I was living in Hollywood, Florida. And the cool thing about my background is I have knowledge and actual hands-on experience growing in South Florida, Southern California, and now East Texas. And each one of those areas has a completely different set of the good, bad, and the ugly, if you want to put it that way. You've got your challenges, and you've got some amazing stuff that grows in all of those different areas. Yeah. We have a school garden donation program. I've got the seeds behind me here. Every year we donate to schools, veterans gardens, elderly care centers, even like VFW gardens. I've had lots of people reach out, nonprofit community gardens, over 150 different organizations. And all it takes is for you to send me an email, tell me what your program is and where you are, and I will send you some seeds.
It sounds like you just love messing around with seeds.
I do.
That's great. Well, that's awesome. I know you've, like I said, I've bought seeds from you. I've promoted your stuff for a long time. I think you do a great job. You have great seeds, a great inventory of seeds. I mean, a little bit of everything. Even though I'm up here in Indiana, our climates are quite a bit different. Well, not right now. They're not. They're pretty hot here. But normally, we definitely have a pretty severe winters, and a lot shorter growing season than what you have. It's actually kind of flip flop though. Probably easier for you to grow in the spring and fall than it is in the summer. Where here it's just a little bit different. But I think what we're going to talk about today, we can tell people how to kind of evaluate their zone for what to plant when and wherever they are. As I think those rules are kind of the same wherever. It just might be different dates of where it falls. So we can just talk about that. But first, I guess I want to jump into how does one go about deciding when and what to plant for a fall crop for their growing zone?
That is a great question. So I have what some people might say as a controversial idea or opinion on zones. For annuals, your zone doesn't matter. And so a lot of people say, wait a second, your USDA zones, everybody has this thing where you have to know what your USDA zone is. And a lot of people ask me, well, I'm in zone 8. When should I plant? Here's the thing. Zone 8 Texas is completely different than zone 8 Florida and zone 8 California. And all three of those states have a zone. You want to focus on your frost dates because that is more important for annuals, specifically annuals, like like we talked about for fall crops, specifically broccoli, cauliflower, beets. Those are cool weather crops. And you need to know when your it's kind of backwards. Your first frost date is for fall and your last frost date is for spring. So you want to know those estimated dates. It's always an estimate. There's never a guarantee that it's going to be the same date every year. But once you figure out what your frost dates are, then you can either count back for a fall garden or plan ahead for your spring garden, depending on what you're working on. So, in my opinion, frost dates are more important than what zone you're in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly. And I only mentioned zones because that is what we focus on is the first and
Right.
last frost date. And every those maps are available. That information is available online really easy. You can go to USDA's website and
Yep.
there's a map. There's usually a map, a zoning map with all that, and it has all the information about your areas. Usually, you can just put in your zip code, and it
Yep.
will give you your first and last average frost date. Like you said, though, that can fluctuate a couple weeks either
Yep.
way, real easy, real easy. This year, like our last frost date this year was way earlier than normal. I was able to get things in the ground way earlier because we were 3, 4 weeks away from our
Yeah.
average last frost date. And I was looking at the forecast and it wasn't even going to be close for weeks. And I was like, well, let's get started then, so I was
Yep.
already plopping things in the ground and it gave me a real big jump on my corn because my corn is like super tall already.
Yep.
um,
I did the same thing this year,
yeah.
and I discussed this in some of the live videos. My estimated last frost is March 12th, but
Hmm.
I was looking at my calendar in mid-February and I didn't have any freeze on the calendar. So of course, I break the rules quite often and I started planting seeds anyway. And yes, it did get a little colder, but there are some varieties that can tolerate a little more cooler area or cooler temperatures, and then even some slight or mild frost, and they'll still continue to grow. So
Yeah.
I got almost a 4 week jump on planting this year, which was fantastic.
And there's some methods too. I mean, you can use row cover and things like that just in case it's close. You can get those
Yep.
covered up and really protect some plants and do some things that can get you through if it's freezing temps, if it's just a
Yep.
frosting temp, you can usually survive it. If it gets too cold, you might have trouble still. But yeah, there's
Yeah.
things you can do to make that better. Now, when it comes to what you plant, I mean, of course, there's just I want to get into the maybe a breakdown of the different varieties of things you can plant. But determining overall, I find that most seed packets or at least information on websites when you buy something, they'll have like the days to maturity. And that's what I'll
Yes.
kind of look at, kind of figure that up where you're at. And then,
Yep.
again, like you said, first frost date, back up. I usually like to give myself a couple weeks of, you know, safety there,
Yep.
and then start planting. That's kind of how I figure out what it is I want to plant. Obviously, you want to plant things you like to eat. I mean, that's one of the things that's going to determine that. If it's just
Yep.
something you don't like, just because it grows doesn't mean you want it. But my one thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about too was that might be different than springtime, especially in my area, might be a little different than early springtime, is direct sowing versus transplanting. Now I find personally that when you're dealing with transplanting in the middle of summer, it's a lot touchier. It's a lot
Yep.
hotter outside. Those seedlings are very delicate. Takes a
Yep.
lot. You have to spend a lot more time, kind of acclimating them to the temperatures. And with direct sowing, though, it seems like they just kind of take off and go a lot better, and they acclimate as they grow. I mean, you find that too in your area?
I do. There's almost everything that I plant is direct sown. I have found
Okay.
over the years that there are a few exceptions. Tomatoes and peppers are pretty much the only thing as this year anyway. Those are the only things that I planted ahead of time and then transplanted into the ground. And we're not talking about fall, we're talking about, spring planting for summer. But I find that anything that is in my area, at least, that is direct sown is far more healthier and sturdier because there's no hardening off,
Yeah.
there's no transplant shock. And yeah, you might lose a couple to say like cutworms or something, or pill bugs people have issues with seedlings sometimes. I find that it just overall, the health of the plant is so much better when you direct sow.
Yeah, I find they grow so much faster too, because once they
Yeah.
start, they just take off, and where you'll have that transplant shock, and
Yep.
it'll kind of stun it for maybe a
Yep.
week or two before it really starts taking off again, and so generally, yeah, direct sowing is best. Now, here's where there's a big difference between your climate and mine. If we want to get a jump on things in the spring because we have a hard winter and a longer winter, we obviously have to start a little bit more indoors early spring than you would.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find for me, it's mostly direct sowing. for the fall crops if I want to
Yeah.
get the. They just seem to do better and a little more. They just grow stronger, like you said, and I like that.
Yeah.
Now, do you do anything for like soil preparation for your like you're say you're just you pulled one thing? Like I just pulled my all my garlic for one thing. I got a bed here. I'm going to plant something else in it. Do you do anything to get that bed ready for the next crop?
I do. So I practice crop rotation.
Hmm.
So if I planted garlic in a bed, I'm not going to plant garlic in it next year. I'm going to rotate and put it into another bed. We have gophers here. We've got squirrels here, and we have water issues where when I planted my very first garden, when we moved here in 2001, this property, water flows from one end to the next, and it went right through my garden. And
Ugh.
I had these nice even rows and it went right through my rows. So I had like a small river running through it. So almost 100% of my garden is raised beds,
Mm.
which makes it a little easier for me. There's a lot less bending over, or at least not as far to the ground in a raised bed. And so I will always crop rotation and I will amend when necessary. So if I had garlic, which was a heavy feeder, I'll add something we offer, which is called Mountain Flower Root Boost.
Mm.
It's a really fantastic soil amendment. It's natural. The product inside that the ingredients are organic, so I don't have to worry about anything weird in there. And then it's going to depend on what I'm planting. So if I'm putting another heavy feeder in there, obviously I want to add more nutrients. Or I'll plant something that doesn't necessarily require as much nutrients, like a lettuce or a green, or again, depending on when you're harvesting. If it's summertime, you're definitely not going to be putting lettuce in there. But say if it's a tomato, for example, I'm definitely going to amend with something that has some calcium and magnesium in it as well. So
Yeah.
it really just depends on what I'm planting.
Yeah, that's good advice. I usually definitely throw a couple inches of compost on a
Yep.
bed. And again, like you said, it depends on what I'm going to be planting in there. If I do grow lettuce in the summertime. I have some kind of a microclimate areas where I provide quite a bit of shade, and I'll put some lettuce in those beds after a heavy feeder or something to kind of or radish or something like that. It grows really fast and easy and doesn't deplete the soil too bad. And yeah, and but I'll still add a little bit of compost and some things and put over that and kind of prepare that soil for the next the next growing. But yeah, the good thing is a lot of heavy feeders here anyway. I don't have time to grow most of those because they do take a little, usually the heavier feeders take a little bit longer to grow because a lot of them are fruiting. I'm thinking of tomatoes and peppers and like that. So I'm not going
Yeah.
to have like a second planting of those generally. Some things there are that you could grow though. So let's talk about a few crops. Let's just break it down by maybe some types of crops. Let's talk about leafy greens. What are some leafy greens that you think work well as a mid-season crop to plant right in the heart of summer that you could probably harvest up into the fall?
Sure. So there's a couple that we offer that are a little more unique than something you would get in the grocery store. And I've been talking about those lately. Malabar spinach is one of them. It is
Yeah.
a vining green, and some people like it, some people don't like it. It doesn't have that irony flavor to it sometimes that an actual spinach does. It's perfect for my Florida customers, and it does grow really well here when it's hot.
Is that a
New
perennial
Zealand,
where you're at?
not where I'm at because we do get a
Okay.
hard frost.
Okay.
Sometimes it snows, sometimes it doesn't here. So it's not here, but in South Texas, or an area that doesn't get
Okay.
a hard freeze, it can be a perennial.
I thought so. Yeah.
New Zealand spinach, which is not a spinach at all, is also a perennial green. It kind of flops over because its stems are very weak. And
Hmm.
so it's good ground cover. So if you want to kind of reduce if we mulch, but if you've got an area where you want some more ground cover, New Zealand spinach is a really good one. Again, it's weird. It doesn't taste like spinach and it feels like a succulent.
Really?
So
Yeah.
it's so weird. And it's
Almost like
it's
oh, what am I thinking of that grows the weed up here? Purslane's what I'm thinking of. It's kind of like purslane, maybe in the leaf structure, maybe, or
very, as far as the texture, yes, it's very much like purslane.
okay.
And it is a perennial. It has the funkiest seed. it is a large seed and it has spikes on it. So like when I shoved it into the ground, it stuck in my finger because it was so spiky. So just a weird, unique variety that would grow really well even in the heat.
How many days of maturity on something like that?
I started harvesting. Let's see, I actually planted those in fall, February 14th, and I was harvesting by March 15th.
Okay.
So you can start a small harvest within 30 days, but really I think it's about 45 to 60
Okay.
days for a real harvest.
Yeah, that'd be plenty of time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can deal with a little bit of cold, but not much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about all the common things like kale and chard and those things. I mean, those things. I mean, I knock the snow off of those things and eat them.
Yes.
They're just bulletproof. But and you got plenty of time to grow things like that, especially
Swiss chard as well as another one. And there's some that are more heat tolerant as far as those go. So for kale, lacinato kale is a little more heat tolerant than some of the others. Um, Georgia green collards and Morris heading collards are a little more heat tolerant than some of the other ones as well. So, and I had a Morris heading collard that grew for 2 years here.
wow.
So we had snow and we had 110 degrees with the heat index and it still lived. So that was a really good one for me.
Yeah, I have a lot of kale and chard that will overwinter. Now, if you get a really cold winter, like 2 years ago, we had a record lows and it did kill everything. But normally, I have some, even here in Indiana, I'll have some chard and some kale that will overwinter and come back in the spring. So
Yeah,
that's kind of amazing, really.
those
Yeah.
are good ones.
Yeah, I grew up mustard greens is another one. I noticed it grows pretty fast here, and it seems like you'd have plenty of time. It does well in the heat. I mean, it will bolt if it's too bad. I mean, it will go to seed. Of course, the seeds are might be what you want if you're growing mustard, right?
Sure,
But
sure, exactly.
yeah, but it does. It seems to grow pretty fast also. But yeah, those are some really good suggestions on leafy greens. Root vegetables are a pretty common one for a midsummer crop too to plant and harvest in the fall. You got some of those that you could suggest?
Yep. I like the what I call double duty crops. So there are more heat tolerant radishes that you can plant in the summertime, like your daikon radishes.
Hmm.
There are some radishes that are actually better to plant in fall, like watermelon radish
Hmm.
is does better for me in the fall than it does if I plant in early spring. So something to think about if you want a really fun radish, if you've never grown watermelon radish, definitely add that to your list. Beets are a good one.
Hmm.
Again, a double duty crop. You can harvest the greens, you can harvest the roots. I'm the only one in my house that eats the beets, the root,
That's my
but
favorite part.
but everybody eats the greens, so that's a plus. You know you can harvest the greens and just leave it in. Turnips are another one. You can eat the greens and the root. Rutabaga is not something that a lot of people think about. It's not a super
I don't like it.
it's a funny one for me and my family because every year at Thanksgiving, my grandmother would only make a bowl about this big of rutabaga, and my grandfather and I were the only people at the table that would ever eat it. So
I'm
it's
not a fan, but I mean, it grows great. I'm
it's
telling you what, if you want a crop that's a great potato substitute and you like the taste of it, and it's just big crop. I mean, they're huge. I
yeah,
mean, you get a ton of it for what you
yeah.
plant, and it is a great growing crop and easy to deal with. But yeah, you got to like the taste, and it just has a different, strange taste to me that I am not fond of. I don't know what it
Yeah.
is. There's just a taste about it I don't like.
I prefer turnips as a potato substitute than a rutabaga. And you're right, it does have a different taste to it than some of the others. So,
Yeah.
like a lot of people, if they don't like beets, it's because it tastes more earthy, which
Yeah.
is really just a nice way of saying it tastes like dirt.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's really just depends on your what you like. But there's also some things that you can grow that are more unique. Of course, I've got access to 900 varieties of seeds.
You're growing
So
everything.
I can grow, a little bit of everything if I have the space. So golden beets, something a little different. Chioggia beets, which look like when you slice it, it looks like a peppermint candy.
Oh
So
yeah, I've seen those.
it's
Yeah.
inside. So those are some fun ones that you can grow that you can eat both of them, but also it's fun. And I find that my customers with kids will buy the weird stuff because their
Mhm.
kids will eat the weird stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
good. You're talking about double duty. You talking about radishes earlier. My favorite part of radishes is the seed pods. I love
yes,
it when
they're
they go to seed. Those
so
seed
good.
pods are fantastic. I love them.
And in that sense, it's a triple duty crop because you can
Yeah.
still eat the greens, you can
Mhm.
feed them to your chickens or your livestock. But yeah, I posted that on my Facebook page the other day, and there were so many people that had no idea you could eat the
Oh,
seed pods.
I will just drop those plain in a salad and eat them like that, or you can pickle
Yeah,
them. They're
yep,
fantastic pickled. I mean, they're just, yeah, people don't even know you can eat those, and they are just
yeah,
great. I love them. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's some great suggestions on some root vegetables too. And I find that is one of the easier crops to grow for a fall harvest as well. I mean, just they're way more, when you think about the leafy greens, a lot of them are just a little bit more sensitive, but the root vegetables seem to be a lot more hardy for
yeah.
that. How about brassicas? Do you try to grow brassicas for a fall crop?
I do. And there again, it's the same thing. There are some that are more heat tolerant than others. There are some that will do better. For me, it's easier for me to grow a shorter maturing, faster maturing variety. So early purple sprouting is more of like a 65-day versus a 90-day. Like your Brussels sprouts are like a 90 to 100-day. When it goes from 90 degrees to 40 degrees, in that short span of time, I mean, this year we didn't even really have a spring. We went from winter to summer. So there wasn't really time for a spring crop of something like Brussels sprouts, but the sprouting broccoli was really good. You're not getting a massive head, but you
Right.
still get enough broccoli. And again, you're eating the leaves and the sprouted florets instead of just the florets. So you can still eat some of the broccoli.
Yeah, yeah. How about I know there's some cabbages, like some smaller cabbages, or like a 60-day cabbage. Um,
There's even a 30-day cabbage.
is there really? Okay.
It's part of our June seed sale. So if you're watching this later, you may not be relevant to you, but extra dwarf pak choi is 33 days. It's a Chinese cabbage, so it's not
Mhm.
a heading cabbage. And regular pak choi is about a 55-day. So
Okay.
those are smaller and they're not a big head of cabbage, but still really good. And then for an early one, you've got, I think it's Brunswick and early round Dutch are a little closer to the 60 to 70 days instead of 90 to
Yeah.
90 days.
Yeah. And they're great. I did that last year and started that second crop. And I don't remember what it was I bought. I bought one that was like a 60-day cabbage and it did really
Yeah.
good. I mean, they weren't real big heads, but they were nice. I mean, they were
Yeah.
decent. Yeah, great suggestions there.
Those do better for us here too.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any squash that you would plant in the middle of the season to grow for a fall crop?
So speaking of breaking all the rules, when I first moved to Texas, I had this person that went so far out of his way to email me to tell me that there was no way he said it's impossible to start a garden in the summertime in East Texas.
Yeah.
So I broke ground here on the 30th of June and started a garden from scratch. So yes, there are a ton of squash that you can still grow.
Yeah.
Um, Specific for squash vine borer resistance,
Mm,
I would say Tatume squash, which is a Mexican variety, and Tromboncino squash,
mhm.
which can be grown and harvested like a summer squash, or you can leave it on the vine a little longer and you harvest it like a winter squash.
Okay.
So those two varieties are fantastic in the heat and the summertime, even in Texas. And the others would be white scallop squash, which I was able to harvest in as few as 42 days.
Oh, wow.
So I planted that July 1st in my very first garden here in East Texas, and I was able to start harvesting. They were small, but they were still harvestable and edible at 42 days. So absolutely.
Yeah, great. Yeah, because that's something. I mean, I've I've planted like, like summer squash, like your crooknecks and things like that in the midsummer. They will
Yeah,
grow, but generally they struggle a little bit in that heat. If you have a cooler summer, they do fine, but they
yeah,
seem like they struggle a little bit. They're better in the spring.
yeah,
Of course, I plant the butternut and stuff early, so I'm kind of harvesting it in late summer. So
yeah.
I generally don't do a lot of trying to harvest squash in the fall, but I might try that. Yeah, some of them other varieties sound like they'd be maybe work really well.
Yeah.
Beans are something I grow a lot of for fall crops. I mean, I do a lot of second plantings on those and getting those going
Yes.
again. I'll pull beans and all everything. I mean, I'll start over, and I have plenty of time on those. Are any that you particularly like when it comes to beans?
Yeah, I do. I generally succession plant my bush beans because you don't harvest them as long as your pole beans. But I was just asked this question this morning. The Roma bush beans are fantastic for a summer and a fall crop. That was one that was a special request from one of my Florida customers because they did so well in the heat. They are super hardy. They don't take up a lot of space. What they're called a semi-vining, and it's mostly just because they don't grow completely upright like a regular bush. They kind of spread out a little bit, but not like a pole bean.
Okay, nice.
The jade bush beans are hands down probably the most productive and heat tolerant of the bush beans that I've grown. So I do a fall crop. I plant in the summer for a fall crop of those as well. They're fantastic for dilly beans because they're stringless. So
Yeah,
those are probably the one of the more popular, especially they're my favorite, so it's always a plus. But if you are in, again, it depends on your climate. If you're planting in the summertime and you live in a hot area like Texas or Florida, yard long beans are a great choice because they stand up to the heat probably indefinitely.
yeah, nice. Yeah. Is there anything else that you think makes a great? Are there any fruiting crops that you think were good? That have kind of a fruit on them or anything? Or is there anything else you can think of that would work really good? Give people something to think about for a fall crop?
So on my website, I have a full breakdown actually where you can plan ahead. And it says exact kind of what you said earlier, where you take the time for maturity and then you add a week or two to it. And the breakdown is fairly comprehensive. What I haven't mentioned was things like kohlrabi. We mentioned cauliflower earlier. You can still do things like amaranth for the
Hmm.
greens. You're
Yeah.
not necessarily going to be harvesting for the seeds if you plant in the summer for fall, but you can still get the greens.
Hmm.
Uh, but there are still some fruiting. So there are some faster maturing melons that you might try. Again, depending on how much time you have.
Yeah.
I just planted some fast maturing pumpkins on the first in of June. So
What's about the best those can do on time wise?
it's going to depend, but some of them are as early as 85 days.
Okay.
So if I planted January 1st, or I'm sorry, June 1st, I'll just barely get enough time depending on when my
Okay.
just for a late fall harvest.
Okay.
Let's see, what else did we not? There's so much. It depends.
I don't think there's probably any tomato, maybe some cherry tomato varieties, maybe you might be able to squeeze in. Some of those are a
Maybe
little
check,
shorter.
maybe the Czech bush tomato or the one that I can never pronounce, but I call it the Q tomato. It is 40 days from transplant.
The Q
That is,
tomato. What are we talking about here? Try to
it's
say it.
Quinlanburg Fure something. I like I said,
Okay. I'll see if I can
I mess it
interpret
up
that and
every time.
find it.
So I call it a Q tomato. It starts with the letter Q, and I just throw that out there. So
Okay.
that's 40 days from transplant. So that's
Really?
probably
From
the
transplant.
only one
Okay.
that you could get still.
Do you carry
Um,
those on your site?
I do.
Oh,
Yep, I
awesome.
do.
Okay.
And so tomatoes are out. I did mention the
How
squash.
about cucumbers? Any
Carrots.
cucumbers that you'd have time to, would cucumbers do well planting in the middle of the summer?
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a few
I
that
always plant them in the spring, and I don't think I've ever done like a second planting of those or anything. But
yeah, there are a few. If you have a longer summertime, the Suyo long and the Armenian cucumber are both very heat tolerant. If
okay,
you have a shorter, if your fall is coming up fairly quickly, you might try something like the bush crop to cucumber. It's
okay, I've never grown a bush crop cucumber.
okay. So I will say this: the name is somewhat. It's not quite right. It's not an actual bush cucumber like you would get for a determinate tomato,
Okay,
but it's very short and it produces very quickly.
okay,
So that's one. If you have a really small space and you don't have this massive trellis to use, a bush crop is a good one. And then lastly, I would say double yield cucumber. It is the double yield cucumber will blow your socks off. It produces so many cucumbers, and I think it's like a 55 to 60 day.
Okay.
So you
Are these
might
a
still,
smaller cucumber or are they, I
yep,
was gonna say, it sounds
it's
like
more of
some,
a pickling.
okay, great. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love to try some of those. I might have to get some of those. Yeah, I love the smaller ones just for like, we're big pickle eaters here. We love
Yep,
our pickles.
me too. And
Yeah.
so if you ever notice how a cucumber grows, usually you have, one flower, one cucumber sticking out, and you're good to go. Whereas the double yield cucumber, my sister asked me to try and identify this random cucumber that she planted in the garden. And I right off the bat knew exactly what it was because the double yield produces multiples on one little spot.
Really?
So
Wow.
it really is a pretty spectacular producer.
You talked me into that one, that's for sure. Wow. Something else I think folks need to probably consider is this time of the year or coming up over these next month or so is if you're going to do cover crops, this is the time you'd want to plant those and get those laid down on your beds come fall. And,
Yep,
you know, you just want to break those down before they go to seed. And this is the time for that too. So it is kind of it's not really a crop you're going to be harvesting, but it is going to be a crop that's going to be very useful for your homestead
yep,
if you're wanting to use cover crops. So I think this is something you got to think about too. You want to get those seeds for those cover crops about this time.
yeah, absolutely. I just had a customer ask me what's a good cover crop to use in her garlic bed because she's not going to use the garlic bed right away. She may want to use the garlic bed for garlic again later. So alfalfa is a good one for that one.
Mhm.
And there's no need to disturb anything. You just use a little couple of little packs of seeds and you're good to go. It's not anything that takes a lot of time or takes a lot of effort. Cover crops are definitely an easy one to
Yeah.
add to your garden as well.
Yeah, like I said, it isn't like you're going to harvest those or anything, but the
Right.
benefits from that for your garden beds is amazing.
Absolutely.
It'll just do a ton for it. So, yeah, I think those are some really good suggestions, and I think folks, if they're not doing their succession planning and they're not getting that second crop in, pretty much anywhere in the United States. I mean, most places there's
Yeah.
some things you can get a second crop of or succession plant and get something going later in the season for a fall harvest, and some things really do better. We didn't even really talk about like peas. I mean, some places, if you don't have a really hot summer, you might be able to start peas or something like that and get that going on a trellis for late fall. Because some of
Yep.
that stuff grows really fast. I mean, there's just a lot of things to consider. Like you said, just start looking at, find out your first frost date, do the math, find what you like, and see if you got time to grow it and go
Yeah.
for it. And there's some things that perhaps, depending if you're maybe way up north in the United States, maybe transplanting might be a better option. But for most places, I think direct sowing might be the way to go. But overall, I think just about anywhere you're at, you can definitely take advantage of those fall crops and
Definitely.
put a lot more food in your cabinets for in your canning and your refrigerating or whatever. And I just think it's a lot of folks plant once, harvest, and then they're done.
Yeah.
And
I noticed
sometimes I
that
feel
too.
that.
I'm constantly planting. So
Yeah.
I'm constantly expanding gardens and constantly planting. So if I'm and not only that, sometimes it's just a matter of time. So maybe I don't have time to plant all of my gardens all at one time because I also don't have time to harvest all of that at one time. So
Right.
if you succession plant, if you stagger your plantings, you're not going to have 100 beets to have to harvest tomorrow.
Hmm.
And like me, I'm the only one that's eating those beets. So that's a lot for me to can or eat all at one time. So
Right.
if you stagger your planting, it's much easier to not only manage, but then also preserve for a later time. So, and like you mentioned, peas, you can definitely get a fall harvest from those. And you can choose if you have a shorter growing season. The Alaska pea, for example, is a fast, shorter maturing variety as well. So,
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many. I mean, there's
yeah,
an endless list of things we could have talked about as far as we just tried to kind of hit a few things here and there for folks to think about. But there is just, yeah, this is why I love to sit down with seed catalogs or go on websites like your website, for example, and just see what's there, find the
yeah,
information, what you like, and then just start picking and choosing and seeing, what you can grow because there's a lot of options out there. And if you're just a once and out person, you're missing a lot of potential for your garden if you don't
yeah.
take advantage of that. So, Mary, I want to give everybody an opportunity or give you an opportunity to point everybody to all your stuff again, your website,
Sure.
your YouTube channel, and all that.
So you can find all of my seeds at marysheirloomseeds.com. You can email me if you've got questions. I all in every one of my videos, I always tell people reach out. It can be overwhelming, and there's always the YouTubers that are sometimes make it more difficult, and I try and keep it simple. So my email is mary@marysheirloomseeds.com. You can also find it on my website as well. And then there's a comprehensive planting guide that you can go on my website and look up that has all the information I discussed today is also in there. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. So you can find out so much information from all those different places. And if you're on YouTube, join me every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Time. I go live. You can ask lots of questions there as well.
Yeah, great stuff. And also, for listeners of the podcast, you are a member of the Homestead Front Porch Facebook group, so they can even talk to you in there because you're in there.
There you go. Absolutely.
Also, yeah, reach out to you in there if you want. Great stuff. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this with us. I think it's going to be really helpful for some folks who maybe have never done this before, tried to get that second crop in, or just maybe need some more ideas on what they can grow. You definitely gave me a few ideas. I mean, you mentioned a few things. I'm thinking, okay, here we
Good.
go. Get started again. All right, Mary. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great stuff from Mary. Thank you again for coming on and discussing all of that. I do want to tell people that you were actually on the podcast a long, long time ago, clear back, I think, on episode 17, so way back when. And you discussed on there the difference between heirloom and hybrid and GMO seeds because there's a lot of confusion about that topic in the seed realm. A lot of people especially confuse a hybrid with GMO, and you broke that down for us and gave us a great explanation of those three things and their differences. And I would point people to that resource as well if they have any kind of confusion about that. So yeah, another great resource. And yeah, folks, definitely reach out to Mary and check out her website because tons of great seeds at a great price and get those seeds for your fall garden so you can get started and get that second crop in. So there you have it, folks. Until next time, happy homesteading. God bless. And I'll fill in Rachel's part today. Grow where you're planted.